Not possible, the VA official said, but for Amanda Collins, that answer was never enough. Could one mother's fight change a broken system? In a small kitchen in Spencer, Massachusetts, she stared down a mountain of forms and policies, fighting to keep her late husband's promise alive. She kept going, never backing down, even when the system buried her in red tape and endless phone calls, and just when every last hope seemed to fade. A black SUV pulled up in front of her home. A general stepped out, his quiet authority a promise in itself, and on that day, the promises were finally kept. Welcome to Graceful Valor Stories, where tales of compassion and kindness are told. Let's uncover what really happened. Amanda Collins stood in the small kitchen of her old farmhouse, the morning light slanting through the window above the sink. The sun painted the wooden cabinets in warm honey tones, but her eyes stayed fixed on the folder in her hands. She turned the papers over again and again, as if searching for answers between the lines. Outside, Spencer, Massachusetts, stirred to life with quiet purpose. The town's white church steeple peeked over the roofs, and the gentle hum of farm trucks rumbled down Main Street. But inside her kitchen, the only sound was the ticking of the clock on the wall, each second louder than the last. Jacob sat at the table, his fingers drumming softly on a plastic cup. 21 years old, tall and lanky, with eyes that never quite met hers, he hummed a low melody, lost in his own world. While Amanda studied the stack of forms in front of her, she had 36 months of GI Bill benefits, 36 months paid for by the blood and sweat of her husband, Staff Sergeant Michael Collins. He had served 3 tours in Afghanistan, each one another promise to his family. When he didn't come home, the army folded a flag and placed it in Amanda's hands. That flag still sat on the mantel, a silent witness to everything she carried alone. Now, those benefits were meant for Jacob, her boy, her responsibility. His doctor said he had a chance, a real chance, if he could get into the program at Lesley University, a program built for people like him, a program that could help him find his own voice in a world that never stopped talking. Lesley University was already approved by the VA. She checked that a dozen times, but the specialized program for autistic students wasn't listed, not yet, and without that final approval, the benefits her husband had earned meant nothing here. Amanda had spent weeks trying to reach someone who could help. She called every number she found on the VA website, each conversation the same polite script: "We understand, ma'am. Please submit Form 221990. If you've already done that, you'll need to complete the supplemental program approval request. Processing can take up to 90 days. The words felt hollow, like reading from a script in a play she never auditioned for. She sent emails, left voicemails, even drove to the regional office 2 towns over. Each time she was met with polite smiles and downcast eyes, as if they were sorry for her, but not sorry enough to act. She remembered the last trip vividly. Jacob had come with her, sitting quietly in the corner of the waiting room, tapping the floor with his foot. Amanda had waited for nearly an hour, her hands sweating around the folder that held every document she could find: Jacob's diagnosis, letters from his doctors, proof of her husband's sacrifice. When her name was called, she stood in front of a young man in a pressed uniform who looked at her with the weary eyes of someone who had delivered too much bad news. He flipped through her papers, nodding politely. "I'm sorry, ma'am," he said, not meeting her gaze. "This isn't something we can resolve here. It's a matter of policy. You'll need to speak with the Program Approval Office." Policy. Amanda walked out of that building feeling like she'd been erased, like everything Michael had fought for was just another form to be filed away. The drive home was a blur, Jacob humming in the passenger seat, the radio playing low, in Amanda's mind a tangle of questions she had no answers for. At home, she pulled out an old photo of Michael dressed in his desert camis, his face tanned and lined from the sun. She traced the edge of the frame with her thumb, remembering the night before he left for his last deployment. He'd held her close, his breath warm against her temple, and said, "No matter what happens, I'm going to make sure Jacob's future is safe. That's my promise." That promise weighed on her now, as heavy as the folded flag on the mantel. She couldn't let it be another empty pledge. She wouldn't. Could this mother's persistence rewrite her son's future? She stood at the window, watching the morning light spread across the fields. The trees outside bent in the breeze, their leaves shimmering silver green. Amanda took a slow breath, steadying her thoughts. She knew she couldn't force the VA to care, but she could keep trying. She could keep showing up again and again until they saw her son's name as more than a case number. She turned back to Jacob, who was still tapping the cup in rhythm, lost in a beat only he could hear. Amanda walked over and rested a hand on his shoulder, her fingers brushing the soft flannel of his shirt. "We'll figure this out, sweetheart," she said quietly. Her voice shook, but she willed it steady. "I promise you." Jacob didn't answer, but his fingers stilled for a moment, a fleeting pause, a silent connection between them. Amanda set the folder down on the table and took a sip of cold coffee. The bitter taste anchored her in the present. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but she knew this: she would not let the VA's red tape keep her from honoring the promise Michael had made. She would not let her son's future be lost in a pile of forms. The weight of that vow settled over her like a second skin. Familiar, Unshakable Amanda Collins had never been a woman who gave up easily, and she wasn't about to. Start now. As the clock on the wall ticked on, she closed her eyes for a moment, gathering her strength, then she opened them again, her gaze sharp and unflinching, because some battles aren't fought with rifles and boots, some are fought in quiet kitchens with paper and pen and a heart that refuses to back down. Amanda Collins was ready for that fight, and she would not let her husband's memory be forgotten. The next morning, Amanda woke early, the sky outside still wrapped in soft gray light. She packed a small bag with snacks and water bottles, her hands moving with quiet determination. Jacob watched her from the doorway, his head tilted, a question in his eyes. She smiled at him, even though her heart felt like it was caught in a vice. We're going to Lesley University today, she said, her voice calm. I want you to see it, Jacob. I think you'll like it there. Jacob didn't speak, but he nodded once. That was enough. Amanda slipped her hand into his and together they walked out to the old minivan, the engine sputtering to life with a familiar cough. The drive took nearly 2 hours, winding through rolling hills and small towns that blurred together in shades of green and brown. Amanda kept glancing at Jacob in the rearview mirror. He pressed his forehead against the window, humming softly to himself, fingers tapping on the glass in time with a song only he knew. When they arrived, the campus was quiet, the morning air cool and gentle. Amanda took a moment to steady her breath before leading Jacob inside. The hall smelled faintly of old books and fresh paint, the kind of smell that always made her think of possibility. A young woman with kind eyes met them at the reception desk. She wore a bright scarf that looked like a splash of summer in the pale hallway. Welcome to Lesley, she said warmly. Can I help you find something today? Amanda introduced herself and explained why they were there. The woman's smile never wavered. She offered them a visitor badge and walked them down a long hallway lined with posters about inclusion and support. Jacob's eyes lingered on each one, curiosity flickering in his gaze. They met with a counselor named Megan, a woman with gentle hands and a voice like warm tea. She listened carefully as Amanda explained Jacob's diagnosis and their hopes for the program. Megan nodded often, her eyes never leaving Amanda's face. I wish I could promise you this will be easy, she said softly, but I can promise you that we'll do everything we can to help Jacob find his place here. He deserves that. Jacob sat in the corner twisting a rubber band around his fingers. When Megan showed him pictures of the program's sensory room, his lips parted in a small, odd smile. Amanda's heart squeezed tight in her chest, that flicker of light in his eyes, she hadn't seen it in so long. Megan walked them through the classrooms, pointing out the quiet corners and the tools designed for kids like Jacob. Amanda took careful notes in a small spiral-bound notebook, her handwriting neat and steady. Every detail mattered. Every chance to make this real felt like a lifeline. They spent the whole morning there talking to teachers and peeking into activity rooms. Jacob was quiet, but he never pulled away. He touched the edge of a weighted blanket, his fingers lingering on the soft fabric, and Amanda saw something in him shift, a tiny thread of belonging. Afterward, Amanda thanked Megan, her voice thick with emotion. I just want him to have a chance, she said. Megan squeezed her hand gently. He will. She promised. He will. The drive home was silent. Jacob leaned his head against the window again, but there was a softness in his shoulders that hadn't been there before. Amanda kept her hands tight on the wheel, her mind racing through everything she needed to do next. That night, she spread all the papers across the kitchen table. She organized them into neat stacks, medical reports, letters of support, Jacob's educational history. She checked every form twice, then 3 times, her pen scribbling notes in the margins. She slept only a few hours, her mind too loud to rest. When dawn broke, she packed it all into a manila envelope and drove straight to the VA office. She stood in line behind a man in a battered leather jacket, a woman clutching a file so thick it looked like a small book. When it was her turn, Amanda stepped forward, her voice steady. I'm here to submit these forms for my son, she said, laying the envelope on the counter like an offering. The clerk glanced at it, then at her, and nodded politely. You'll need to fill out the supplemental benefits request as well, he said in a flat voice, and the disability verification addendum. Amanda felt her heart sink. She had already filled out every form they'd given her, but she nodded, took the new stack of papers, and sat in the corner to start again. Her hands ached as she wrote, each word another promise to Michael's memory. Days blurred into weeks. Amanda spent every spare moment on the phone, her voice growing from repeating the same questions. Each call ended with another form to complete, another hurdle to clear. The VA's system felt like an endless labyrinth of red tape and polite refusals. Jacob's therapists did what they could. They wrote letters of support, praising the Lesley program and explaining how it could change Jacob's life, but even they admitted there was only so much they could do. The VA had its own language, one that didn't speak of hope, only of eligibility and protocol. At night, when the house was quiet, Amanda would sit in the kitchen with the lamp burning low. She'd unfold the letter Michael had written her before his last deployment, the paper creased and worn from years of reading. His words were simple, but they never stopped echoing in her mind. When you see a wall, don't turn away, he had written. Hit it hard enough to let it know you're coming. Amanda traced those words with her finger. The ink faded, but the meaning as sharp as the day he'd written them. She knew she couldn't let this be the end. She wouldn't let Michael's promise be buried in someone else's paperwork. One evening, after another fruitless call to the VA, Amanda sat with her head in her hands, exhaustion pressing down on her like a weight. She looked across the kitchen at Jacob, who was lining up colored pencils in perfect rows. His focus, his quiet determination, it mirrored her own. In that moment, Amanda realized she needed help beyond the system. She opened her laptop and began to type, her fingers moving on instinct alone. She wrote to a local veterans group she'd read about in the paper, pouring out her heart in every line. She told them about Michael, how he'd given everything he had so his son would never have to fight alone. She told them about Jacob, about the program that could change his life, and she told them about the VA, the walls that kept rising no matter how hard she tried to knock them down. When she finished, she read the letter once more, her chest tight and her eyes stinging. Then she pressed send and sat back, her hands trembling in her lap. She didn't know if anyone would read it or if they'd care, but she had to try, because some battles aren't won in uniform or on foreign soil. Some battles are fought in small kitchens, under flickering lights, by people who refuse to let go of what matters most. And Amanda Collins was ready to fight every inch of the way. Could a single letter turn the tide for this family? The rain fell steady and cold that afternoon, washing the sky in muted grays. Amanda sat at the kitchen table, the folder of Jacob's paperwork spread out before her. Her hands trembled as she flipped through the pages, the words swimming in and out of focus. She felt the weight of it all pressing down on her, heavier than any battlefield. Jacob sat nearby, tracing the edge of a placemat with his fingertip, lost in his own quiet world. Amanda blinked back the sting of tears, swallowing the ache in her throat. She didn't know how much longer she could keep going. Each form, each phone call, every no felt like another closed door. She closed her eyes for a moment, breathing in the damp scent of rain that drifted through the open window. Then she heard it, the low, deliberate rumble of engines on the gravel driveway. She looked up sharply, confusion knitting her brow. Outside, a convoy of black SUVs pulled in, their headlights cutting through the mist. Amanda pushed back from the table, her pulse quickening. She stood in the doorway, her breath caught somewhere between hope and fear. The lead SUV came to a stop, and a tall figure stepped out into the rain. He wore a dark green dress uniform, metals gleaming softly on his chest. His posture was straight, his stride measured, a soldier's bearing that time had only refined. His hair was silver at the temples, and his eyes were a calm, steady blue. Amanda felt her heart hammer in her chest. She didn't know this man, didn't know why he was here, but there was something in the way he moved like the world never rushed him, because he had already seen the worst of it. He stopped a few feet from her door and raised a hand in quiet greeting. "Mrs. Collins," he said, his voice low, but carrying easily over the rain. Amanda nodded, her throat too tight to speak. The man gave a small, respectful nod. "My name is General David Pierce," he said gently. "May I come in?" Amanda hesitated only a moment before stepping back, holding the door open for him. Inside, the air smelled faintly of coffee and damp earth. The general paused on the threshold, his eyes sweeping the small kitchen, the worn wooden table covered in forms. He nodded once as if taking it all in. "Thank you," he said quietly. He removed his hat and tucked it under one arm, water dripping from the brim. Amanda motioned to the table, her hands still shaking slightly. "Please sit," she managed, her voice rough. General Pierce took the offered seat with a slow, deliberate grace. He set his hat down carefully, then folded his hands on the table. Amanda hovered for a moment, then sank into the chair across from him. Jacob watched from the doorway, his eyes wide, but curious. Amanda rested a hand on her son's shoulder, grounding them both in the moment. The general's gaze was steady but kind. "I received your letter," he said, his tone measured. "It was forwarded to me by the local veterans group. I read every word." Mrs. Collins, Amanda felt her breath catch. She hadn't known if anyone would even open that email, let alone this man who carried the weight of a nation in his quiet presence. She swallowed hard, her fingers curling around the edge of the table. "I'm sorry to barge in like this," he continued softly, "but I've seen too many families worn down by red tape and silence. I wanted to hear your story myself." Amanda nodded slowly, her throat tight with emotion. She took a shaky breath, then began to speak. She told him about Jacob, about the way he hummed when he was nervous, about how the world could be too loud for him sometimes. She told him about Michael, about the promise he'd made to keep their son's future safe. General Pierce listened without interrupting. He didn't glance at his watch or shift in his seat. He simply watched her with eyes that had seen enough to understand how much one story could matter. She spoke of the VA, the endless forms, and the quiet refusal of the system to see her son's face behind the paperwork. Her voice shook, but she didn't stop. She told him about Leslie University, about the program that might finally give Jacob a place to belong. When she finished, the room was silent but full. The rain still tapped softly at the window, a gentle counterpoint to the storm that had raged inside her for months. General Pierce leaned back slightly, his expression thoughtful. He let the silence linger for a moment longer, then nodded once. "Thank you for sharing that with me," he said, his voice calm and sure. "I know it wasn't easy." Amanda swallowed, blinking back tears she hadn't meant to let fall. I need someone to hear it," she said softly, "to understand that he deserves this chance." General Pierce's eyes softened. "I do understand," he said. "I've seen too many promises broken by red tape. Too many families left waiting for help that never comes." He paused, glancing at the stack of forms on the table. He reached out and laid a hand gently on the folder, his fingers brushing the worn edges. "But I also know this," he continued, "your husband gave everything so his son could have a future. That's not a line in a file. That's a debt we all share." Amanda felt her shoulders loosen, the tightness in her chest easing just a little. The general looked her in the eye, his gaze steady and unwavering. "It's time to end this," he said simply. He pulled a slim phone from his pocket, the dark screen reflecting the kitchen's dim light. He dialed a number with practiced ease, his voice low and certain as he spoke. "Get me the director of program approvals at the VA," he said quietly. Now, there was a pause, then a soft "yes, sir" crackled through the line. Amanda watched him, her heart thudding in her chest. There was no hesitation in his voice, no uncertainty, only the quiet authority of someone who had spent a lifetime cutting through the noise. He listened carefully, then spoke again. "I have a file in front of me. Amanda Collins, widow of Staff Sergeant Michael Collins, her son Jacob, qualifies for educational benefits that should have been processed months ago." His tone was even, but every word carried weight. He paused, listening to the answer on the other end. "No," he said firmly, "we're not waiting. This isn't a request. It's a directive. You'll approve that program, and you'll do it today." Amanda sat frozen, tears slipping down her cheeks, unchecked. She'd never seen anyone speak to the VA like that, never seen anyone refuse to accept no as an answer. General Pierce ended the call, slipping the phone back into his pocket. He looked at Amanda, his eyes gentle. "Sometimes the only thing a wall needs is someone willing to knock hard enough," he said softly. He reached across the table, his hand warm and steady on hers. "Your husband's promise was never meant to be buried in bureaucracy," he said, "and neither was Jacob's future." Amanda let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. The general stood slowly, retrieving his hat and settling it back onto his head with quiet precision. "I'll be in touch," he said, "but know this, Mrs. Collins, this fight isn't yours to carry alone anymore." He turned to Jacob and gave him a small, respectful nod, then he stepped out into the rain, the door clicking shut behind him with a soft finality. Amanda stood there, her hands still pressed to the table, the warmth of his touch lingering like a promise. Outside, the rain kept falling, but for the first time in months, she felt something steady and unbreakable settle in her chest. Hope. A week later, the sun rose over Spencer, Massachusetts, in a soft wash of gold. Amanda stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the collar of her navy blouse. Her fingers trembled slightly, but there was a quiet steadiness in her eyes. Jacob was in the kitchen, his hands carefully folding the straps of his backpack. He hummed to himself, a low, contented tune that Amanda had never heard before. She watched him for a moment, feeling something in her chest crack open and fill with light. They drove in silence, the roads winding past fields that shimmered in the early morning light. Amanda kept one hand on the wheel and the other on the folded invitation resting in her lap. The weight of it was small, but the meaning felt as heavy as the promise she carried in her heart. When they arrived at Lesley University, the campus was alive with gentle energy. Students walked across the green, their laughter drifting in the warm breeze. Amanda parked the minivan and turned to Jacob, her voice soft. "Are you ready?" she asked. Jacob nodded. He didn't say anything, but the small smile on his lips spoke louder than words. Inside, the ceremony was simple: a few rows of folding chairs, a podium with a modest arrangement of flowers. But in that quiet space, there was a sense of reverence that Amanda felt in her bones. She and Jacob sat in the front row, their chairs worn but sturdy. The program director stood at the podium, her voice warm and sure as she welcomed them. She spoke about the power of community, about the promise of a future built on dignity and inclusion. Then she paused and glanced at Amanda and Jacob. "Today," she said, "we celebrate a new beginning, not just for our program, but for every family who's ever wondered if the system could truly see them." Her words settled in the room like sunlight, gentle and unwavering. Amanda felt tears prick her eyes. She reached over and took Jacob's hand in hers, feeling the quiet strength in his grip. The director went on to explain how the program had been officially added to the GI Bill, an exception made in honor of the sacrifice of Staff Sergeant Michael Collins. She spoke of the letter Amanda had written, of the quiet battle she had fought, and of the man who had ensured her voice was finally heard. As she spoke, Amanda looked over at Jacob. His eyes were bright, his shoulders relaxed in a way she hadn't seen in years. He wasn't rocking or fidgeting, he was simply present. Amanda blinked hard, fighting back the tears that blurred her vision. When the director stepped down, General Pierce took her place at the podium. He wore his uniform with a quiet pride, the medals on his chest catching the light as he looked out at the small crowd. He didn't need to clear his throat or adjust the microphone when he spoke. His voice carried effortlessly calm, grounded and sure. "This is more than a program, he said, it's a promise kept, a promise made by a father who served with honor and a mother who refused to be silenced. Amanda felt every word settle deep in her chest. General Pierce's gaze swept the room, pausing on Jacob with a gentle smile. This isn't just about one boy, he said, this is about every family who's been asked to wait too long, who's been told no too many times. He turned to Amanda then, his eyes soft. Your husband's sacrifice will never be forgotten, he said, and neither will your strength. Amanda nodded once, her throat too tight for words. After the speeches, the small crowd drifted outside. The sun was bright now, the air warm and gentle. Amanda and Jacob walked across the lawn, the grass soft beneath their feet. Jacob's fingers brushed the tops of the clover blossoms, his head tilted back to catch the light. Amanda watched him with a quiet wonder. She thought of every night spent hunched over paperwork, every morning she woke up and chose to keep going, and now, standing here, she knew it had all been worth it. General Pierce joined them a few minutes later, his hands clasped behind his back. He looked at Jacob and then at Amanda, a small smile lifting the corners of his mouth. He belongs here, he said simply. Amanda nodded, her heart swelling with gratitude. Thank you, she said quietly. The general shook his head. No thanks needed, he replied. This was always his right. They stood there for a moment, the sun warm on their faces. Then the general spoke again, his voice softer now. This isn't just the end of a fight, Mrs. Collins, he said, it's the beginning of something better. Amanda took a slow breath, feeling the truth of his words settle deep in her bones. She looked at Jacob, who was watching a small group of students nearby. His face was calm, his lips curved in a faint, genuine smile. For the first time in a long time, Amanda felt something settle in her chest that she hadn't known she was still missing. Peace, not because everything was easy now, or because the road ahead would be without struggle, but because they weren't alone anymore. Later, as the ceremony wrapped up, Amanda found herself standing at the edge of the green. Jacob was already in the classroom building, meeting with the program director, his steps sure and measured. She closed her eyes for a moment, breathing in the warm June air. She thought of Michael, of his quiet strength, of the way he'd looked at her the night before he left for Afghanistan. No matter what happens, he'd said, I'll make sure Jacob's future is safe. Amanda opened her eyes, a small, quiet smile on her lips. She could almost feel him beside her, his hand at her back, steady and warm. She whispered the words softly. A promise returned to the air. I kept your promise, she said. I kept it. General Pierce joined her then, his presence calm and grounding. He didn't say anything, just stood beside her, his gaze on the classroom where Jacob now belonged. The silence between them was comfortable, filled with understanding. Finally, he spoke, his voice low. This isn't just a victory for one boy, he said. This is how we honor every soldier who gave more than we could ever repay. Amanda nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks unchecked. She didn't try to wipe them away. They weren't tears of sorrow, they were tears of relief, of hope, of a promise kept in the quiet spaces where no one else could see. As the sun climbed higher, Amanda watched through the window as Jacob joined a small group of students in a bright, airy classroom. His laughter drifted out to her on the breeze, light and easy, and her heart ached with love. This was what she had fought for, not just a piece of paper or a line in a file, but this moment, a place where Jacob could belong, a place where Michael's sacrifice lived on, not as a memory, but as a foundation for something better. Amanda let out a long breath, her shoulders finally relaxing. She looked at the quiet campus, at the gentle green lawns and the bright windows, and she knew they were exactly where they needed to be. And in that quiet moment, Amanda Collins understood that some battles are worth every ounce of strength you have, because when the dust settles, what remains is not the fight itself, but the hope it leaves behind. Jacob's laughter drifted out again, and Amanda smiled, the sound like a balm to her soul. She closed her eyes for just a moment, and in the stillness, she whispered softly, we're home. In our darkest moments, kindness still finds a way, often in the quietest places. Not everyone who helps wants recognition, some just need to know that today someone isn't going hungry, and sometimes that alone is enough to change a life. You may forget the story, but if no one retells it, history stays silent forever. Subscribe to Graceful Valor Stories, where justice is honored, kindness is remembered, and no act of quiet heroism is ever lost.